The Threx had been watching Earth for 60 years. From orbit. Through probes no bigger than a human fist. Drifting in the upper atmosphere where no radar could find them. Through radio signals intercepted and decoded with the cold patience of a species that measured time in centuries. They had watched the little blue world argue and build and burn things down and build again. They had watched the creatures on its surface fight each other over lines drawn in dirt. They had watched them dig up their own planet for black liquid and burn it until the skies turned brown. The Threx High Council called it beautiful, in their language. Not the planet. The stupidity. Commander Vorkai stood at the observation deck of the warship Relentless Dominion and looked at Earth the way a man looks at a meal he has already ordered. It was just a matter of waiting for it to arrive. "Tactical report," he said. His second-in-command, Drex, stepped forward and pulled up the holographic display. Blue sphere, 7 continents, swirls of white cloud, population, 8,200,000,000, military strength, impressive by primitive standards, divided into 203 separate nations, most of them openly hostile to each other. They cannot agree on a single governing body, Drex said. Their largest military powers spent most of the last century building weapons to use against one another. Today, Vorkai turned the globe slowly with one long finger. Space capability? Limited. Satellites. One small station. Some probes in the outer system. Drex paused. Nothing that can reach us. Vorkai said nothing. He looked at Earth a moment longer. A small, wet, chaotic world, full of creatures that had spent most of their recorded history trying to kill each other over land, water, oil, and disagreements about invisible beings who lived in the sky. He almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Threx commanders did not feel sorry. It was considered a waste of processing. "Begin approach," he said. The Relentless Dominion was one of 47 ships in the invasion fleet. 47 ships that could each survive a direct hit from anything humanity had ever built. The Threx had been a spacefaring civilization for 11,000 years. They had conquered 31 worlds. They had never, not once, not in 11,000 years, lost a conquest. 31 worlds. Not one had put up a fight worth remembering. The first sign was the satellites going dark. Elena Vasquez noticed it at 4:47 inches the morning, because she had not slept properly since a particular roadside in Kandahar 8 years ago, and she had long ago made her peace with that. She sat in the operations center at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado, coffee cooling beside her keyboard, watching a board full of green lights turn red. One by one. GPS, weather relay, communications, military channels. The International Space Station went quiet mid-sentence. The astronaut on board had been talking to ground control about a water recycling problem, mid-word. Then nothing. Just static, and then not even that. Elena stared at the board for 4 seconds. "Sir," she said. General Hoffman was already walking toward her. He had the look of a man who had spent 30 years expecting the worst, and was still somehow not ready for it. "Talk to me." "Everything's gone," Elena said. "All of it. 64 satellites in 11 minutes. He looked at the board. He looked at her. He looked at the board again. "That's not a system failure." "No, sir," she said. "It is not." He picked up the landline, the old copper wire kind that nobody had bothered to rip out when everything went digital. His hand was steady. She noticed that. It mattered. A man's steady hand at 4:47 inches the morning when the sky was about to fall. "Scramble everything," he said. The Threx entered the atmosphere at 0600 Greenwich Mean Time. They did not sneak. Sneaking was not a thing the Threx did. They came in over 3 continents at once, their entry ships burning bright as small suns through the upper atmosphere, and for exactly 43 seconds, the people of Earth stood in the streets and fields and on rooftops, and looked up at the fire in the morning sky. Some took videos. Some of those videos were still uploading when the phones died. The first city hit was Moscow, then Mumbai, then Chicago, then Lagos, Sydney, Sao Paulo, Tokyo. 8 cities, almost simultaneously, struck with the Threx pressure weapon, a technology that collapsed every electrical system within a 3-kilometer radius without destroying a single building. Phones died. Cars stopped in the streets. Hospitals went dark. Traffic lights, water pumps, heating systems, all of it just stopped, mid-function, like a clock with its batteries pulled out. The Threx did not use bombs in the first phase. That was by design. 31 worlds had taught them that you did not bomb a planet you intended to keep. You bombed the will. You bombed the electricity and the communications and the sense of safety, and then you waited for the surrender to arrive. It always arrived. Private Dungway was on leave in Chicago when the sky went white. He was 22. He was eating a breakfast sandwich from a cart on Michigan Avenue and thinking about nothing in particular, whether he had money for a movie, whether the girl in his unit had meant anything by what she said last Thursday, whether this was actually the best breakfast sandwich he had ever eaten, or whether hunger was doing the marketing. He decided it was both. The sandwich was incredible. Hunger was involved. That was fine. Then the sky went white. His phone died in his hand. Every car on the street stopped at once, sudden and total, like a scene from a movie where someone presses pause. An electric bus drifted silently to the curb. The coffee cart's digital payment screen went black. Somewhere 2 blocks away, something exploded, a transformer. He would figure out later with a crack like a rifle shot. Silence. Then noise. Horns. Shouting. A child somewhere screaming. Dengwei stood on the sidewalk with his dead phone and his half-eaten sandwich, and looked up at the shapes hanging in the sky over Lake Michigan. Not clouds. Not planes. Not anything. His brain had a file for. He dropped the sandwich. He ran. The first 24 hours were a kind of controlled disaster. 12 major cities crippled. Power grids across 3 continents down. Communications shattered into pieces. Governments scrambling to reach each other on the old copper landlines, the ones that ran on physics instead of software, and had therefore survived. Chaos in the streets. Chaos in the command centers. Chaos in every language simultaneously. The Threx landed ground forces at 1,400 hours. They looked like nothing anyone had imagined and exactly like everything everyone had feared. 8 feet tall, 4 arms, the lower 2 ending in broad, flat hands built for gripping, the upper 2 ending in something that functioned like hands but weren't. Armored in plating, the color of old iron, they moved in organized columns, calm and even and absolutely certain. The way things move when they have done this so many times, the doing of it has become boring. Their weapons discharge sound as a weapon. Directed sonics. Non-lethal at medium range. At close range, the field medics would later describe the injuries and then stop describing them. The Threx expected full collapse of organized resistance within 72 hours. It was a reasonable expectation. Clean, calibrated, based on 60 years of careful study. They began landing in the 6 largest cities on 4 continents. Not to destroy, to occupy. To hold the infrastructure intact and wait for the surrender broadcast to start. Vorkai monitored from orbit. He watched the tactical feeds. Humans scattering. Communications fragmenting. Governments going silent. 3 nations had already transmitted surrender protocols. The signals picked up by Threx relay satellites still in position. He thought, this is going well. He had thought that 31 times before. By hour 36, Elena was in a basement in Colorado Springs. She had with her 7 officers, 1 civilian technician named Bao, who could rebuild any piece of electronics you put in front of him, and had not slept in 2 days and smelled like it, 4 cases of MREs, 2 rifles, a diesel generator, a hand-crank radio, and a map of North America printed on actual paper that someone had thought to laminate. She had a plan, which was more than most people had. We need to fall back to Cheyenne Mountain, Major Torres said. Cheyenne Mountain is dark, Elena said. Everything electronic inside it is fried. It's a very expensive cave right now. Then we regroup and… Where? She kept her voice even. On what communication system? Using whose transport? She looked at him, not unkindly. Torres was a good officer. He was just applying old logic to a new problem. And the new problem was not interested in old logic. They knocked out our nervous system before they knocked on the door. Everything we planned for assumed we'd have comms. We don't have comms. Torres didn't answer. Nobody answered. The generator hummed. Bao soldered something on the table without looking up. Elena looked at the map. She traced the positions of reported Threx ground forces reported by radio, by runner, by 1 very tired man on a bicycle who had ridden 40 miles to reach this basement and was now asleep on the floor in the corner. 6 cities, all of them on major water sources, all of them on rail lines, on May, Trell, all of them on power grid nexus points. They want the infrastructure intact, she said. Bao looked up from his soldering. They hit our electronics, not our buildings, Elena continued, more to herself than anyone. Not the power plants themselves, just the control systems. The software. They want a working planet, not a ruin. She put her finger on Chicago. Which means there are things they will not blow up. Things they need. Things they are actively working around. She turned to Torres. That's a list of targets. Torres stared at her. You're saying blow up American infrastructure. I'm saying blow up the things they're counting on us not to blow up. She held his gaze. Yes. A long moment. Outside the basement, somewhere distant, something rumbled. All right then, Torres said. By the end of the first week, 11 nations had formally surrendered. Vorkai received each transmission personally. He was fluent in 4 human languages. He had spent years preparing for this. Years studying this small, chaotic species before deciding they were ready to be absorbed. He was thorough. He was professional. He read each surrender, confirmed the terms, and moved on. Then a report came from his ground commander in Chicago. 3 soldiers were missing. Not dead, not in retreat. Missing. Their locator signals had simply stopped in a warehouse district on the city's south side. No battle record, no weapon discharge logged, no distress signal. Just gone. Like someone had reached down and erased them. Vorkai filed it as an anomaly. The next day, 7 more soldiers missing near the water treatment facility. Same pattern. No recorded engagement. No warning. He filed it as a concern. The day after that, a patrol unit of 12 walked into what their sensors marked as an abandoned rail yard and did not walk out. All 12. Gone. Vorkai stopped filing and started calling. Keterix, he said. What is happening in Chicago? His ground commander was quiet for a moment. In 11,000 years of Threk's military history, a ground commander being quiet when asked a direct question was not a thing that happened. We are not certain, Keterix said. That is not an answer. No, sir. A pause. The humans in this sector are not behaving according to model. Vorkai turned this over. Explain. They should be panicking, Keterix said. Individually. Breaking into small isolated groups. Competing for resources. We have seen this in every historical record of their disaster response. But what we are observing is, he stopped. Keterix. They are helping each other, Keterix said. It came out strange, like the words didn't quite fit the thing being described. They are organizing, without communications infrastructure, without central command. They are leaving marks on walls, physical marks, and somehow those marks are coordinating movement across the city. Vorkai was quiet. There is something else, Keterix said. Tell me. We found a location, a warehouse, south sector, approximately 200 humans inside. They had working communications equipment rebuilt from salvaged components. They were armed. They had food stores. Keterix stopped again. They were planning, looking at maps, discussing our patrol routes. Vorkai felt something he was not accustomed to feeling. He set it aside. Send 4 full units. Sweep the warehouse. Secure every human inside. Oh, yes, sir. The units arrived 6 hours later. The warehouse was empty. Every human gone. Supplies gone. Maps gone. Bao and his soldering iron gone. Nothing left but bare concrete and 1 piece of paper on the floor. Keterix translated it and read it to Vorkai over the comm. 1 sentence. In English. We know you're watching. Good. Pay attention. Vorkai stood at his observation window and looked at the blue planet below him for a long time. 31 worlds. He thought about the note. He thought about the missing soldiers. He thought about the humans moving through a broken city without phones, without power, without any of the things his models said they could not function without. He thought about the note again. Pay attention. He filed a request for an additional 8 warships from the home fleet. It was the first time in 31 conquests he had asked for reinforcement during the opening phase. He told himself it was routine caution. Dengwei had not slept in 41 hours. He was in a different basement now, in the south side of Chicago, with 9 people he had not known 4 days ago. A retired army engineer named Rosa, a firefighter named Marcus, a pharmacist named Sujin who turned out to know more about field medicine than most medics Deng Wei had met, a 16-year-old named Caleb who was terrified and also the best shot of all of them, which Deng Wei felt strange about and chose not to examine closely. Rosa was explaining how to wire a pressure sensor to a door using parts pulled from 2 broken car alarms and a smoke detector. Her hands were steady. Deng Wei watched her hands and practiced having steady hands. When they come through here, and they will, Rosa said. That sensor gives you 8 seconds of warning. Use them. Use them how? Someone asked. Run or fight. She did not look up from the wire she was stripping. That's always been the only choice available to people in situations like this. Nothing new. She finished the sensor. She stood up. She looked around the room at 9 people. A soldier, a firefighter, a pharmacist, a teenager, a high school teacher, a plumber, and 3 others who had just been people living their lives 6 days ago, and she said, "You all scared?" Nobody said no. She nodded. Good. Scared means your brain is working. The ones who aren't scared are the ones who make the stupid mistakes. She picked up her bag. Let's go. Deng Wei followed her out into the street. Into Chicago, still standing, battered and dark but standing. The alien ship sat in the sky over the lake like dropped coins, silver gray and silent. The streets smelled like cold air and something burnt. Somewhere a dog was barking and not stopping. He had been afraid for 5 straight days. He had gotten used to the fear the way you get used to a bad knee. You know it's there. You factor it in. You keep walking. What he had not expected, what none of the Threx models had accounted for, was the specific quality of the anger that lived under the fear. Not hot anger, not screaming anger, cold, patient, inventive anger. The kind that looks at a problem from every angle until it finds the one the problem didn't expect. Team Day. Rosa was 60 feet ahead of him, moving through the rubble of a city she loved, already thinking 3 steps past the door sensor toward whatever came next. Deng Wei thought, if they knew about her, they would already be afraid. They didn't know about her. They didn't know about any of them. That was their mistake. The biggest one. Not the invasion itself. Not the tactics or the timing. The mistake was 60 years of watching and seeing the chaos and the fighting and the burning, and concluding, these creatures are weak. They had watched humanity's worst days and counted them as data. They had not understood that the worst days were also the proof that a species which keeps rebuilding after burning itself down, keeps trying after being beaten, keeps organizing in the dark, without tools, without power, without sleep. That species is not weak. It is the most dangerous thing in the known universe, and it had just been given a reason to prove it. 3 months after the ships appeared in the sky, Vorkai had a new problem. It was not the kind of problem he could point to on a map. It had no coordinates, no tactical signature, no clean definition. It was more like a smell, the way something smells wrong before you can say exactly what's wrong with it. He sat in his command room aboard the relentless Dominion and read the daily casualty reports. They were supposed to be declining. In every conquest the Threx had conducted, the casualty curve followed a known shape, high in the first week from resistance engagements, then dropping, then flat, then zero, as the population accepted its new reality and the surviving military fragments dissolved into hiding or surrender. Vorkai's curve was not doing that. It had been low in the first week. Almost nothing. The humans had been scattered, cut off, confused. They had not been able to mount any organized defense. Then it had started climbing, slowly, quietly. A few soldiers here, a patrol there. Nothing dramatic. No major battles, no heroic last stands, no memorable engagements, just a steady, daily draining away of Threx personnel in every occupied city, in every territory, on every continent where his forces had established position. 22 soldiers lost in week 3, 31 in week 4, 47 in week 5, all in small numbers, never more than 3 or 4 at a time, never with a clear engagement record. They were just not there anymore. Drex came in with the week 7 report. Vorkai read it without changing expression. 63 missing or confirmed dead. And something new. 2 of his armored vehicles had simply vanished from a road in what was formerly rural Canada. Not destroyed, not captured, gone. As if the road had swallowed them. He put the report down. They're not fighting us, he said. They're eating us. Drex said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Rosa had a system. She called it the 3 rules, and she had come up with it on day 8 sitting on a concrete floor eating a cold can of soup, and it had not changed since. Rule 1. Never be where they expect you to be. Rule 2. Always be where they are not expecting anyone to be. Rule 3. Hit hard, hit once, be gone, before the echo. It was not complicated. It was not sophisticated. It was 3,000 years of human guerrilla warfare compressed into 3 sentences, applied to an enemy that was stronger and better armed, and covering more territory than any enemy her people had faced before. The aliens were 8 feet tall. Their armor stopped rifle rounds cold. Their sonic weapons could clear a room in seconds, but they walked on roads, and roads could be learned. They communicated on frequencies, and frequencies could be studied. They had patrol patterns, and patterns were just another word for predictable. Rosa's group had grown, from 9 people in a Southside basement to 63 people spread across 4 connected cells, each independent enough to survive the others being hit, each sharing information through the physical mark system that Caleb, the 16-year-old, the best shot, had designed. Painted symbols, chalk marks, knots in rope left on fence posts. The aliens had better technology than any human military had ever faced. They did not have 63 people who were furious and had nothing left to lose, and knew this city like the backs of their hands. Deng Wei was on watch on the roof of a parking structure on a Tuesday morning when he saw his first real opportunity. He had been watching the alien patrol route for 2 weeks. Same street, same time, 6 soldiers, always the same spacing. Always the same stop at the intersection of Michigan and Randolph where they scanned the buildings on both sides before moving on. 6 soldiers, 8 feet each. 4 arms, armor. He had a rifle. He had 11 rounds. He had Rosa's Rule 3. He radioed real radio, rebuilt by Bao from salvaged parts that ran on a frequency the aliens hadn't figured out yet back to base. I've got a window. Rosa's voice came back. How long? Maybe 40 seconds. When they stop at Randolph. A pause. Take it. Then you run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Go to secondary. Copy. He settled in behind the low concrete wall at the roof's edge. His hands were doing the fear thing. The fine trembling that he had learned was just his body getting ready, and not actually a problem. He let them tremble. He breathed. The patrol appeared at the far end of the block. 6 soldiers, same spacing. He did not have rounds that could punch through their chest armor. Rosa had worked that out in week 2, after 3 people had lost their lives learning it the hard way. But the Threx had a joint, a flexible connection at the side of the neck, where the armor plating met and could not fully fuse without limiting head movement. A vulnerability of design, a biology that needed to turn its head. Rosa had drawn him diagrams. He waited. The patrol stopped at Randolph. He fired twice. 1 miss. 1 hit. The stricken soldier went down. Not dead, he could not confirm dead at this range, but down, and not moving. The others raised weapons, scanning the buildings. He was already moving. Rifle down, back from the wall, stairs, ground floor, out the back through the gap in the fence, into the alley. He ran 4 blocks without stopping. He went to secondary. He sat in the dark in the empty dry cleaning shop that was secondary and shook for a while. Not long. Long enough. Then he stopped shaking and picked up the radio. Done, he said. Clear. Good, said Rosa's voice. A pause. Nice shooting. He sat with that for a moment. 1 down, he said. 1 more than yesterday, she said. That was how they counted. Not in victories. Not in territory. Not in grand gestures. 1 more than yesterday. Every day. Every city. Every cell. 1 more than yesterday. In space above the Pacific, Vorkai was trying to explain to the High Council why his conquest was taking longer than scheduled. The council met via holographic relay. 9 faces in 9 small glowing panels arranged in a semicircle before him, all of them older than he was, and more patient about showing their displeasure, which in its own way was worse than anger. The conquest is proceeding, Vorkai said. Is it? Said High Counselor Maith. She had the tone of a person who had been shown the numbers before the meeting and was asking the question as a formality. 40% of the major population centers are under direct control. An additional 30% have surrendered under formal terms. The infrastructure, We are losing 7 soldiers per day, Maith said. On average, yes, in small engagements. 7 per day. She let that sit. In 11,000 years of conquest, we have never sustained a continuous daily loss rate past week 2. The room was quiet. Vorkai stood in it. The humans are an unusual species, he said. They are a primitive species with projectile weapons and no space capability, said another counselor. Our models had this conquest completing in 30 days. The models did not fully account for. Did not account for what? Commande? Vorkai paused. The honest answer was, did not account for the fact that this species fights like it has nothing to lose, reorganizes faster than we can disrupt it, and appears to find new ways to kill us every 72 hours. The honest answer was that he had watched 60 years of human disasters and drawn the wrong lesson. He had seen the chaos and called it weakness, and it was not weakness. It was practice. Every war they had fought against each other, every disaster they had rebuilt from, every catastrophe they had survived, had been training. They had been training for this for centuries. Without knowing it, he did not say any of that. He said, the terrain is complex. The population density creates interdiction challenges. I am requesting an additional 6 warships and ground troop reinforcement. And Maith looked at him for a long moment. You will have 4 ships, she said. No additional ground forces. Close this out, Commander. She ended the transmission. Vorkai turned back to his window and looked at the planet. It looked the same as always from up here, blue and white and peaceful. You could not see the fires from this altitude. You could not see the marks on the walls. You could not see 63 people in Chicago or the hundreds like them in every city on every continent, moving through the dark in groups of 3 and 4 and 10, learning the patrol routes, studying the armor, rebuilding radios from salvage, thinking, always thinking. The breakthrough came from a woman named Dr. Adaeze Okonkwo. She was a material scientist at what had been the University of Lagos before the invasion. She had been living for 6 weeks in an underground research space that her students had dug out under a collapsed building using hand tools, which told you everything about both her students and the situation. She had spent 6 weeks studying a piece of Threx armor her cell had recovered from a dead soldier. The armor was extraordinary, a composite material unlike anything human engineers had produced. Dense, lightweight, energy dispersing. Small arms fire hit it and the energy just spread outward and dissipated. It was, from a material science perspective, genuinely beautiful. And it had a problem. The energy had to go somewhere. It dispersed laterally, across the surface, which meant if you concentrated enough energy on a single small point, not a bullet, which was too fast and too focused, but something sustained the armor's dispersal mechanism would overload at that point and fail. She wrote this up in a 12-page document, handwritten in a notebook because the power was still unreliable, and sent it by courier, an actual human person walking across Lagos with a notebook in a backpack to the nearest military resistance contact she knew. The document moved, city to city, underground channel to underground channel. It reached Elena Vasquez in Colorado Springs, 19 days after Okonkwo wrote it. Elena read it twice. Bao, she said. Bao looked up from whatever he was currently building. He was always building something. I need you to make me a weapon that concentrates sustained energy on a 2-centimeter point, she said. He looked at the document she slid across the table. He read it. Okay, he said. Give me 3 days. He finished in 2. It was not elegant. It was a modified industrial cutting laser, the kind used in machine shops, rebuilt around a power cell pulled from a hybrid car battery array, aimed through a repurposed rifle scope. It weighed 11 kilograms and had a range of 40 meters. It was loud and slow to charge between shots and awkward to carry. It went through Threx armor like a finger through paper. Elena held it in both hands and looked at it. Make 40 more, she said. Vorkai received the new report at 0300 his time. And this one, he read 3 times. Threx armor had been compromised. 6 confirmed kills by an unknown weapon confirmed by sensor data and the physical evidence from the bodies, which told a very clear story. Whatever had done this, it was targeted. It was effective. It was already in use in multiple cities. He felt the thing he had been setting aside since the empty warehouse. He let himself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. That was long enough to understand it clearly. Then he set it aside again and began writing orders. He needed to think differently. He had been fighting this conquest the same way he had fought the last 31. That was the error. The humans were not like the last 31. They were something new. Something that did not stop, did not consolidate loss into acceptance, did not stay where you put them. Something that learned. He began writing orders. New patrol formations, rotating and randomized rather than fixed. New armor protocols at the vulnerable joint points. New communication security measures. New restrictions on predictable movement patterns. He wrote for 2 hours. He was thorough. He was professional. He filed the orders to all ground commanders. By the time the orders reached the ground units and the unit commanders had read them and begun adjusting, 22 more soldiers were gone. Because Rosa did not wait. She never waited. She moved before the enemy had time to breathe. She had read Vorkai's new protocols 4 hours before they were issued, pulled from a Threx communication uplink that a 16-year-old with a salvaged antenna array had cracked open like a walnut in the top floor of an abandoned office building on the south side of Chicago. She had adjusted her plans before he finished writing his. Caleb set down the headphones and looked at the papers spread across the floor and said, "I think I'm going to need a bigger notebook." Rosa didn't smile. But it was close. "Bigger notebook?" she said. "More antenna. Better coffee if you can find it." Coffee's a hard ask. Everything's a hard ask right now. She picked up her radio. "That's what we do." Elena sent a message that month through the underground network. It moved the same way Okonkwo's document had moved, person by person, hand to hand, walking across broken cities. It reached 7 different continents in 9 days. It was 3 sentences. "They are not unbeatable. We have the weapon. Send your people to learn it." The response came back in 4 days. From every continent. Some in English, some in French, some in Mandarin, and Arabic, and Swahili, and Portuguese, and 30 other languages, all saying the same thing. "We are coming." Vorkai did not see that message. It did not travel through any frequency his sensors could read. It moved at walking speed across a broken world, but he felt the shape of it, in the daily casualty reports that kept climbing, in the quiet that his ground commanders described, a specific kind of quiet that experienced soldiers knew was not peace, but preparation, in the way the occupied cities had stopped feeling occupied and started feeling like traps. He sat at his window above the blue planet and felt it. He filed another request for reinforcements. The council denied it. He looked at Earth a long time. "Pay attention," the note had said. He was paying attention now. He was not sure it was going to help. 6 months after the ships came, something changed. It was not a single moment. It was not a battle, or a speech, or a decision made in a room somewhere. It was more like the way a season changes. You don't notice the exact day summer becomes fall. But one morning you wake up, and the air is different, and the shift has already happened. The Threx started losing ground. Not dramatically, not with flags and celebrations. Just slowly, the way sand shifts. A district here, a road there, a patrol route that had been held for 10 weeks that one morning was no longer safe to run. A supply line that had functioned reliably that started being hit every 3rd day, until the reliability disappeared. Vorkai noticed it in the reports the way you notice a headache starting at the edge of awareness first, before it becomes undeniable. In week 18, his forces pulled back from the western half of Chicago, not because they lost a battle, because holding that half of the city cost more than it was worth, because every unit he stationed there bled soldiers in a constant slow drip, day after day, and the math no longer worked in his favor. He needed those soldiers. He wrote the pullback order himself. He filed it as a tactical consolidation. In his private log, the one no one else read, he wrote 3 words. "We are retreating." Rosa knew before the pullback order was executed. She knew because Caleb had been reading their communications for 2 months, fluently now, the alien language parsed into a working translation framework that 3 linguists in the network had built collaboratively from scratch. They had started with signal patterns, then vocabulary, then grammar, then meaning. Nobody had told them to do this. Nobody had assigned it. They had just done it because it needed doing, and they were the ones who could. She stood in the top floor of the office building, her headquarters now. 18 people, real walls, a kitchen that ran off a small solar array that Bao had installed on the roof, and watched the Threx units consolidate on the map, Caleb updated hourly. They're pulling out of the west side, Caleb said. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor with headphones around his neck and a notebook in his lap, surrounded by papers. At some point in the last month, he had stopped looking like a frightened teenager and started looking like something that was harder to name. Certain, maybe. Settled in the center of himself in a way that some people never managed, even after a lifetime. I know, Rosa said. That means we can move in and take it back. She was already working through the logistics in her head. Tell the East Side cells to hold position. I want our people in those streets by morning, establishing visible presence, water distribution, medical. The civilians need to see us, not just hear us. And if they come back for it, then we make it expensive. She picked up her radio. We've been making things expensive for 6 months. We're getting better at it. She was not excited. She was not triumphant. She was precise. That was what 6 months had made her, a very precise woman, who did not waste time on feelings that did not serve the next 3 hours. She was also, underneath all of that, in a fury so constant and so deep that it had become structural, like a load-bearing wall. She did not think about it. It just held everything up. The weapon Bao had built had multiplied. From 40 units in Colorado Springs, the design had spread through the network. Handwritten, diagrams on notepaper, passed person to person, rebuilt in basements and workshops, and the back rooms of buildings that used to sell other things. Every cell added improvements, a lighter housing here, a better aiming mechanism there, a power cell that charged faster, a modification that extended the range from 40 meters to 60. By month 6, there were over 4,000 of the weapons operational across the resistance network. They had no official name. Different cells called them different things. Chicago called them closers. The Lagos network called them Okonkwo's, after the woman who had figured out the armor. In Colorado, where Elena had first built one, people called them door keys, because they opened things that were otherwise closed. The Threx updated their armor 3 times in response. Each time, Dr. Okonkwo's network, which was now a distributed research group operating across 2 continents, found the new vulnerability and shared it within 2 weeks. This was the rhythm. The Threx adapted. The humans found the gap. The gap became a weapon. The weapon spread. The Threx adapted again. The humans found the next gap. It was not a cycle the Threx had been built to run. Their conquests had never lasted long enough to require it. Their enemies had never been numerous enough, or connected enough, or angry enough to sustain it. Elena wrote a letter to General Hoffman, who was still alive, still running operations from a mountain facility in Wyoming, describing this rhythm and what it told her. She wrote, "They are faster than us on the hardware. We are faster than them on the adaptation. We just need to stay in the cycle long enough." Hoffman wrote back, 6 months ago I would have called that a long shot. Now I think it might be the whole plan. The battle for New Delhi began on a Wednesday morning and lasted 11 hours. It was not supposed to be a battle. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a coordinated push by 6 resistance cells in the city, timed together for the first time, using the new weapons, supported by what the local network called air assets, which was a charitable description of 6 modified civilian drones with Bao-designed disruption payloads. It became something bigger than anyone planned. The Threx had consolidated their forces in New Delhi around 3 key positions: the old government complex, the rail junction, and the Eastern Water Treatment Facility. Standard Threx logic: control the infrastructure, control the population. The resistance hit all 3 positions simultaneously at 0600 local time. The rail junction fell in 4 hours. It was not clean. It was not the kind of battle anyone tells clean stories about afterward. It was a grinding thing, fought across 100 meters of open ground with door key weapons and salvaged rifles, and 2 homemade armored vehicles that the Delhi cell had built over 3 months in a workshop that had previously made agricultural equipment. The Threx defenders were better armed and better armored, and they were not giving up the rail junction willingly. But the Delhi cell had something that the Threx did not. They knew every brick of that junction. 3 of the cell members had worked there before the invasion. 2 more had family who worked there. They knew which sections of the fence had been weak for years and which maintenance tunnels ran under the main building, and which section of the roof was accessible from the building next door. They came from 3 directions at once. Through approaches the Threx sensors had not flagged, because they were not officially entrances. The garrison of 24 Threx soldiers held for 90 minutes. Then they did not hold. The resistance fighters stood in the rail junction and looked at each other, and it took several seconds for any of them to say anything. Because winning was real, but it had a weight to it that was different from what anyone had imagined. Not lighter, not exactly heavier, different. A man named Priya, who had been a train driver before the invasion and had fought in the Delhi cell since week 2, sat down on the platform with his door key weapon across his knees and put his face in his hands. Not crying, just sitting. After a while he looked up and said, "We're going to need to get the trains running again. The city needs them." Nobody laughed. But everyone understood. Vorkai received the news from New Delhi at 1,400 hours. He stood very still and read the report twice. A complete garrison lost. An infrastructure position taken and held by resistance forces. Not a raid. Not a quick strike. A held position. They were in the junction and they were not leaving. He began running numbers. If the Delhi cell could hold the junction, it disrupted supply flow to the eastern third of the city, which meant his forces in the east would need resupply by air, which was expensive and slow and visible, which meant they would need to retake the junction or abandon the eastern sector. He pulled up the tactical map and looked at it for a long time, and he saw the shape of what was coming. Not just in Delhi. Delhi was a signal, a test, and the test had worked, which meant they would do it again. In Chicago, in Lagos, in Sao Paulo and Tokyo and every other city where resistance cells had been bleeding his forces for months. They were not just fighting now, they were building towards something. What had been 6 months of grinding attrition had been the preparation. The real push was starting. He sent a priority message to the High Council. He did not request additional ships this time. He sent his full assessment. The conquest had moved past the attrition phase into what he classified as organized military resistance. The models had failed. The timeline was no longer valid. The resources required to complete subjugation of this planet had been consistently underestimated. He attached every report from the last 6 months. The empty warehouse, the climbing casualty counts, the armor breaches, the rail junction. He sent it. Then he sat and waited. The council's response came in 6 hours. It was brief. It said, "You were given sufficient resources. Complete the conquest. Nothing else." Vorkai read it twice, looked at his window, looked at the planet. Then he did something he had never done in 31 conquests. He began planning a defensive perimeter. Because what Maith and the council did not understand what they could not understand from 11,000 light-years away, reading casualty reports that were already days old by the time they arrived, was that the situation had changed in a way that numbers on a page could not fully express. The humans were not just fighting back. They were getting better. Every week, every month, every engagement. They were learning from every mistake, adapting to every new tactic, sharing information across a broken world, without any functioning technology, through sheer human stubbornness and ingenuity. And there was something else. Something the reports could not quite capture, but that Vorkai felt every time he watched the tactical feeds from the ground. They were angry in a way that was not going to expire. Elena walked into New Delhi 4 days after the rail junction fell. She had traveled overland from Colorado to the eastern seaboard, then by boat to Europe, then through a chain of resistance contacts that stretched from Portugal to India. 31 days of travel, mostly on foot and in vehicles that ran on cooking oil conversions and prayer. She stood on the platform of the recaptured junction and looked at the city. It was damaged. Not destroyed, the Threx had not bombed it. True to their logic about keeping infrastructure intact, but 6 months of occupation and disruption had left it scarred. Buildings dark, streets emptied of normal life, the marks on the walls everywhere, the resistance symbols that had become a language. But also, the trains were running. Priya had done it. He had 3 lines operational within a week of the junction being taken. Not smoothly, not reliably, but running, carrying people and food and supplies and resistance fighters across a city that was pulling itself back together, one rail line at a time. Elena stood on the platform and watched a train arrive and felt something that she had not felt in a long time. Not victory. Not yet. Not close. But the solid, dependable sense of forward movement. The feeling that the thing they were doing was pointing in the right direction. She found Priya near the control booth. He was arguing with someone about a switching problem, and he was animated and frustrated and completely absorbed in the problem of the train, not the problem of the war, and that itself felt like a kind of defiance. She waited until he was done arguing. "You got them running," she said. He looked at her. He had the tired, focused look of someone who had been living on 4 hours of sleep and professional stubbornness for 6 months. She recognized it because she saw it in the mirror. "Someone had to," he said. "That's the whole story," Elena said. He nodded slowly. "So, what's next?" She looked up at the sky. Still the alien ships up there. Still the occupation in place across most of the planet. A long way still to go. "We take back every city," she said. "One junction at a time." He thought about this. "And after every city?" She held his gaze. "Then we go up." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the train pulling out of the station, overloaded with people, grinding slowly down the reclaimed track. "All right then," he said. She had not smiled in a long time. She almost managed one. Almost. The first Threx warship fell out of orbit on a Tuesday night. Nobody planned it. Nobody ordered it. It was a logistics craft, a supply runner. Smaller than the combat ships, and it came low over eastern India on what should have been a routine resupply run, and a 17-year-old in Bihar, with a shoulder-mounted weapon system she had built from diagrams that had traveled across 3 continents, hid it in the engine, housing with a focused energy burst. She had been practicing the shot for 3 months. She hit it perfectly. The ship went down in a farm field 4 kilometers away. It did not explode. The hull held. The Threx inside, 4 of them were shaken but alive, and they were captured by the local cell within the hour. But that was almost secondary. The warship had come down. A Threx ship. From space. An actual ship. The news went through the network in a day. Not through phones or internet or official channels, through the marks on the walls and the radio signals and the people walking with notebooks in their backpacks. The same way everything traveled now. A human being had shot a Threx ship out of the sky, with something she built herself, from diagrams on notepaper. Vorkai received the news and sat with it for a long time. He had lost ships in combat before, many times. In 31 conquests, there were always losses. He had never had a ship brought down by a planet that, 6 months ago, could not reach him in space. He thought about the rail junction. He thought about the armor modifications. He thought about the climbing casualty reports. He thought about the note in the empty warehouse. Pay attention. He was paying all the attention he had. It was not enough. He began writing orders for a full orbital defense reconfiguration. He began drafting a request for emergency reinforcement that he knew the Council would deny. He began drawing up contingency plans for scenarios he had not considered before this moment. He worked through the night. Below him, the planet glowed quietly in the dark, blue and white, and now, visibly, irreversibly, rising. 9 months after the invasion began, humanity built its first warship. That sentence does not tell the full story. The full story is longer and stranger, and a great deal more uncomfortable. The ship called Perseverance by its builders, because that was accurate, and because no one had the energy for anything more poetic, was not built in a factory. It was not built by a government, or a military program, or any of the institutions that had previously been responsible for putting things into space. It was built in the Atacama Desert in Chile, over 3 months, by a coalition of aerospace engineers, materials, scientists, welders, electricians, retired military technicians, and a handful of people with no formal qualifications whatsoever, who simply showed up and were useful. It used human aerospace technology as its skeleton, salvaged rocket components, repurposed satellite hardware, propulsion systems cannibalized from 4 different nations' space programs. But its spine was alien. The 17-year-old in Bihar had not shot down the last Threx logistics craft. She had shot down the first, and the design had spread through the network like everything spread through the network, hand to hand, notebook to notebook. By month 8, resistance cells had brought down 11 more craft. 4 with intact engineering systems. Dr. Okonkwo's research network had the alien propulsion technology reverse-engineered in 6 weeks. The woman was not boastful. She wrote 1 sentence in her notes when she completed the analysis. "It is elegant engineering, and I am furious they used it to come here." Then she kept working. The Perseverance was ugly. There was no getting around it. It was angular and asymmetrical, and looked like something bolted together by committee in a desert. Which it was. It had no sleek lines or design considerations beyond, does it hold atmosphere? Does it fly? And can it hurt something? The answer to all three questions was yes. Admiral James Harlow had been running the Pacific Resistance Command from a submarine for 4 months. He was 63 years old, built like a man who had never in his life considered whether a situation was too difficult to walk into, and he had the particular quality of stillness that comes from having been afraid many times and learned to work in the space inside the fear. He had commanded carrier groups before the invasion. He had spent 40 years learning how naval combat worked, the geometry of it, the patience of it, the way you positioned forces to cut off options before the enemy knew their options were being cut. Now he sat in the operations room of the submarine Georgia and looked at a model of near-Earth orbit and applied those same principles to a problem that no naval doctrine had ever addressed. Their ships hold position in 4 main clusters, said his tactical officer, Commander Yasha, who was 29 and terrifyingly good at three-dimensional geometry. She pointed at the orbital display. 2 clusters over the equatorial band, 1 over the Arctic, 1 over the South Atlantic. They maintain patrol lanes between the clusters. Communication relay ships sit here, here, and here. Harlow studied the model. Patrol frequency changes every 48 hours, but the rotation pattern, she pulled up an overlay. The pattern itself is fixed. It's the same 8 rotation sequence, cycling. We've confirmed it from 11 months of observation. Harlow looked at the sequence. So we don't need to predict where they'll be. We just need to know where in the rotation they are at any given moment. Correct. He looked at the model a while longer. He thought about how many times in a 40-year career he had sat in front of a map and found the gap that existed because the enemy was too confident to look for it. The gap was always there. Every formation, every defensive posture, every strategy had a gap. The gap was usually the place the enemy believed no one would come from. He pointed to the space between the equatorial cluster and the Arctic cluster, during the rotation point when both clusters were at their furthest separation. There, he said. Yasha nodded slowly. 11-minute window. During rotation 3. Can we get 3 ships through in 11 minutes? If they launch on the right trajectory. She ran the numbers. Yes. Harlow sat back. 3 ships. They had the Perseverance, which was real but untested in space combat. They had 2 smaller craft, faster and lighter, built from a different design with captured alien propulsion that the Chilean team had been calling the Defiance, and Stubborn, the second name chosen by a vote and generally considered an appropriate statement of intent. Get me a line to the Perseverance crew, he said. The pilot of the Perseverance was a woman named Commander Ji Young-han. She was Korean. She had been an Air Force test pilot before the invasion. She had been the kind of test pilot that other test pilots mentioned when they were trying to explain what excellent looked like. The kind of pilot who had a relationship with aircraft that bordered on the philosophical. She walked through the Perseverance the day before launch with the same focused attention she gave everything, and noted everything that was wrong with it, which was a long list, and noted everything that was right with it, which was a shorter list but more important. It would fly. The propulsion was sound. Alien engineering was alien engineering, and even reverse-engineered and rebuilt by humans in a desert. It worked. The weapon systems were functional. The hull would hold. It was going to be a terrifying ride. She was looking forward to it in the specific, grim way she looked forward to anything that was going to require her to be entirely herself. She found Bao in the engine compartment, checking connections for the 4th time. Bao had been on the Perseverance build team from the start. He was thinner than he had been a year ago, and he had the permanent under-eye circles of someone who had substituted coffee for sleep so many times the coffee had simply become his sleep. Ready? She asked. He tightened a connector. I would describe it as ready adjacent, he said. Good enough, she said. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. He looked at her. You scared? She thought about it. The honest answer. Yes, she said. Good scared, though. Not the kind that makes you freeze. The kind that makes you very precise. He nodded. I get that. He looked at the engine housing. I've been very precise for about 11 months now. How's it feel? Honestly, he patted the housing. Like it's almost time to stop being quite so scared and start being something else. What's something else? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the alien propulsion unit that he and Okonkwo's team had spent 6 weeks breaking apart and 6 weeks rebuilding into something that could carry a human crew into orbit and fire on the fleet that had been sitting up there for almost a year. Angry, he said, in a useful direction. The launch happened at 0300 local time, under a sky full of stars and a crescent moon, from a desert that smelled like cold dust. 3 ships, 10-second intervals, straight up and then vectoring, using the gap in the patrol rotation that Harlow had found, threading through 11 minutes of orbital space, where the Threx cluster positions created a brief, repeating blind spot. Catarix was the first Threx commander to see them on sensors. He had been stationed aboard the patrol vessel Second Dominion for 5 months. He had seen things in those 5 months that had changed his understanding of this conquest, in ways he could not fully describe to Vorkai. He had watched the ground reports. He had tracked the trajectory of the war with the particular anxiety of someone who suspected they understood what was coming before it arrived. He looked at his sensor board and felt his understanding complete itself. 3 contacts, rising from the planet. Climbing on trajectories that were using his board confirmed this with quiet, devastating precision. Threx propulsion technology. He opened a fleet-wide channel. Contact, contact, contact. 3 targets. Ascending from equatorial surface. Threx drive signature. The channel stayed open. There was a pause on the other end that lasted exactly 2 seconds, and felt much longer. Say again, came the response from the fleet command vessel. 3 contacts, Catarix said. They are using our propulsion technology. They are on an intercept course for the equatorial cluster. He paused. They are armed. He watched the contacts climb. He thought about the empty warehouse. The note. He thought about 11 months of a conquest that had not behaved like any conquest before it. He thought about the rail junction and the shot-down logistics craft and the armor that kept being broken in new ways. He thought, we should have paid attention to the note. The Perseverance entered the engagement zone, moving faster than any human-built vehicle had ever moved in Earth orbit. Jianghan sat in the pilot's seat and breathed. She could see the Threx ships on her instruments. The equatorial cluster. 4 vessels, the nearest about 800 kilometers ahead, big on the sensor readout. Each one a warship that had been sitting in orbit above her planet for almost a year. Her weapons officer, a former naval commander named Tarek, said, "Weapons ready." "Copy," she said. "On my mark." The Perseverance was not a subtle ship. It was not designed for subtlety. It was designed for the specific problem of punching through alien armor using the same focused energy principle that had worked on the ground, scaled up, mounted on a spacecraft. The Threx equatorial cluster began firing. Ji Young banked hard. The incoming fire missed, barely. The second shot was closer. The third tore through the Perseverance's left thruster housing, and she felt the ship shudder under her hands, and she adjusted, compensating, finding the trim in the damaged flight profile the way she found trim in every aircraft she had ever flown. By feel, by the specific kind of knowing that lived in her hands and not in her head. "Mark," she said. "Tarek fired it." The focused energy weapon hit the nearest Threx vessel amidships. The armor held for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of that specific stress point the alien armor could not fully disperse. Then, it failed. The ship did not explode. It died. Propulsion gone. Weapons gone. Power gone. It began to drift. 1. She came around. The second target. 2 more enemy shots. Both wide, the Threx gunners were recalibrating for a target that moved the way Ji Young moved, which was unlike anything their targeting systems had been calibrated for, because their targeting systems had been built for enemy ships that followed rational geometric attack patterns, and Ji Young was not rational. She was a test pilot, and what she did to a ship could not be described in geometrical terms. "Second target," Tarek said. "I see it," she said. She had him. She had the shot. She was about to take it. And then she heard it on the comm. The Defiance, on her port side, engaging the third vessel. The Stubborn, further out, drawing fire from the fourth. 2 more human ships in orbit, in a fight, above their own planet. A year ago this was not possible. She took the shot. Vorkai heard the engagement from the relentless Dominion, and stood absolutely still for the 43 minutes it lasted. When it was over, 2 of his equatorial cluster vessels disabled. The other two had pulled back to higher orbit, out of range of the human weapons. The 3 human ships were still operational. Though all 3 had taken damage, they had won the engagement. Not completely. Not with the decisive, crushing force that ends things, but they had come up here, with 3 ships that should not have been able to exist, and they had fought his fleet in orbit. And they had won. He sent the engagement report to the High Council. He sent it with no additional commentary. He sent it with no request. He just sent it. The facts. The numbers. The outcome. The Council's response took 1 day. When it came, it was not Maith. It was the first voice, the senior counselor, a position so removed from day-to-day command decisions that Vorkai had received direct communication from the first voice exactly once in his career. The first voice said, "What are we dealing with?" Vorkai looked at that question for a long time. He thought about how to answer it. He thought about 31 worlds. He thought about the models, the 60 years of study, the certainty with which the Council had assessed this target and found it ready for absorption. He thought about what he had seen in 11 months, the adaptation, the persistence, the anger, the rail junction, and the Bihar girl, and the 3 ships in orbit. He thought about the note. He wrote back, "We are dealing with a species that does not understand how to stop. They have no concept of acceptable loss. Every defeat becomes information. Every adaptation we make becomes a problem they solve. They fight each other constantly, and it has made them very good at understanding how to fight." He paused. "I underestimated them in the assessment phase. The entire Council underestimated them. We looked at their chaos and called it weakness. It is not weakness. It is how they generate strength." He sent it. Then he began writing the order he had been avoiding for 3 months. Full orbital consolidation. Pull back from the ground. Establish a defensible position in high orbit and reassess. He was not retreating. He was surviving. Those were different things. He was almost certain they were different things. Below him, the planet glowed. Blue and white. From up here you could not see what was moving on its surface. Could not see the workshops and the basements and the trains running and the marks on the walls and the people walking with notebooks. Could not see the 17-year-old in Bihar who was already looking up at the gap left by the 2 disabled Threx vessels and thinking about trajectories. But he knew it was there. He had paid attention. He knew exactly what was coming. What he did not know, what he could not have known, because no one in 11,000 years of Threx history had needed to know it, was how fast a species like this could move when it finally had the tools it needed, and the full weight of its rage pointed in one direction. He was about to find out. 1 year. That was what it took. 1 year from the day the sky went white over every major city on Earth, from the day the satellites went dark, and the phones died, and the world looked up at fire in the morning sky, and held its breath. 1 year to the day that the human fleet, 17 ships, built in deserts and mountain facilities, and on the floor of the Pacific inside a converted submarine tender, ugly and asymmetrical and howling with rage, broke through the last Threx orbital defense line and made for the relentless Dominion. 17 ships. A year ago, humanity had 0. The fleet had a name now. It had taken 3 months of argument to agree on one, conducted over radio in at least 8 languages, and the final answer was not heroic, not dramatic, not the kind of name that gets carved into monuments. They called it the Home Fleet, because that was what it was, because the thing it was defending was the only word that mattered. Not the nations had fractured and reformed, and fractured again over the course of a year. Governments scrambling to exist. Borders becoming suggestions. Authority belonging to whoever was doing the actual work. Not ideology, not policy, not any of the things humans had spent centuries fighting each other over. Home, the planet, the species, that was enough. It turned out that was more than enough. Ji Young-han commanded the Perseverance in the battle for high orbit. The ship had been repaired, upgraded, and then repaired again after the next engagement and upgraded again after that. It looked nothing like it had when it launched from the Atacama. It had been patched in 11 places with hull material salvaged from 2 different downed Threx vessels, so its surface was a patchwork of human composite and alien plating. Dark and light, alternating, like something that had healed imperfectly and was stronger for it. She was in the pilot seat when the fleet came out of the approach angle Harlow had calculated. using the specific orbital geometry of the Threx defensive formation to create a closing window that would last exactly 19 minutes. 19 minutes to hit the fleet before it could fully respond. "All ships, confirm ready," Harlow said over the fleet channel, his voice from the submarine still on the ocean, still running the tactical operations board from 3,000 kilometers below, was steady as bedrock. 17 confirmations. "Home fleet," Harlow said. "Execute." The Threx had 31 ships in Earth orbit. A year ago, that number had been a death sentence. A year ago, it had been unanswerable 31 warships of the species that had conquered 31 worlds, armed with technology centuries beyond anything on the planet below. 11 of those 31 ships were now disabled hulks, drifting in high orbit, shot down by the Bihar Girl, by Ji-Young and Tarek and the Defiance and the Stubborn, by a dozen other engagements that had each cost something, but had each taken a Threx vessel offline. 20 ships remained. The home fleet had 17. In a straight fight, the math did not work. Harlow did not do straight fights. The battle lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes. Not a clean 4 hours. Not the kind of engagement that can be summarized easily. It was a tangled, three-dimensional chaos of firing lines and counter moves and damage reports, and, at least twice, ships from both sides nearly colliding in ways that nobody planned. The Defiance went dark in the second hour, hit by a Threx broadside in the port propulsion array. Its crew of 12 managed to transfer to the Stubborn in zero gravity, through a connecting line and vacuum, in 18 minutes. In spacesuits that had been built in a Chilean workshop and had never been fully certified because the certification authority had stopped existing, and all 12 of them made it. The fact that all 12 of them made it. Ji-Young thought about that while she was flying, and it made her something she could not name, and she flew harder. The Threx fleet commander made the decision to concentrate fire on the Perseverance in the third hour. It was the right call. The Perseverance was the largest and most capable ship in the home fleet, and taking it out would break the formation's coherence. 3 Threx vessels turned toward her. She did not run. She flew directly at them. Tarek said, calmly, "This is a very aggressive approach." "Yes," she said. "What's the plan?" She did not have a plan. She had something better than a plan. She had 11 months of flying alien propulsion spacecraft through conditions that no training program had ever covered, and she had the specific, grim creativity that comes from having had no choice but to solve every new problem as it appeared. And she had a ship that had been repaired so many times it knew her hands. She flew through the middle of the 3-vessel formation, not around it, through it. The Threx firing solutions were built for targets that maintained geometric engagement distances, targets that attacked from range and angled for optimal weapon arc. Every combat system in their fleet was calibrated for that kind of fight. They were not calibrated for a ship that closed to 400 meters, fired 3 times at near point-blank range, and then broke hard in the direction none of the targeting algorithms predicted, because Ji-Young Han had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing about being a pilot was the ability to move in directions that made theoretical sense, only in retrospect. 1 Threx vessel disabled, then a second. The third broke off. She came around, assessed the damage to the Perseverance significant, manageable, not fatal, and re-entered the engagement. Vorkai watched the battle from the bridge of the Relentless Dominion. The Relentless Dominion was the largest ship in the fleet. It had not moved from its position in high orbit since the first human ships appeared. It was the command vessel, the anchor of the formation, and for 11 months it had been untouchable, too high, too well defended, too far from the range of any weapon the humans could bring to bear. That had changed. He watched his fleet shrinking in real time. Not fast. Not in the sudden, catastrophic way that defined fleet battles in Threx military history. The kind of engagements that were won or lost in minutes. This was the same grinding attrition he had been watching for a year, applied to space. 1 ship at a time. 1 gap exploited at a time. 1 solution found to each new defense he erected. His weapons officer said, "Commander, the human formation is restructuring." He looked at the tactical board. The remaining human ships, 15 of them, 2 lost, 15 still fighting, were pulling into a new configuration. Not defensive, not the standard broadside pattern of fleet engagement. Something else. Something that looked, on the tactical board, like a concentrated point rather than a dispersed line. All 15 ships, angles converging on a single vector. A single vector aimed at the relentless Dominion. "Raise full defensive shield," he said. Full shields are his weapons officer stopped. "Report. We've taken damage to the shield generator in the last engagement," she said. "We're at 60% capacity." 60%. He looked at the converging formation on his screen. 15 ships, all of them aimed at him. For the first time in 31 conquests, Vorkai understood fully, clearly, without any of the comfortable distance that rank and certainty provided, what it felt like to be on the receiving end of an overwhelming force. He had felt it peripherally before. Reports from the ground, numbers in a casualty log. But now it was real, and it was aimed at him specifically, and it felt exactly the way he imagined it had felt, to every commander, on every one of those 31 worlds he had taken. He opened the fleet-wide channel. "All vessels," he said, "focus fire on the lead human ship. The Perseverance." He was going to take her out if it cost him every ship he had left. Ji Young saw the Threx fleet respond. Every remaining Threx ship turning, all fire converging on her approach vector. It was, she thought, a reasonable decision. She would have done the same thing. "Incoming fire. Multiple sources," Tarek said, his voice as calm as ever. She had never once heard him not calm. She thought if the sun fell on the ship, Tarek would read out the impact in the same even tone. "Recommend evasive." "No," she said. "No evasive?" "No." She tightened her grip on the controls. "Tell the fleet to form up on me. Tight. Close as they can." He relayed it. 14 ships formed up behind the Perseverance. Ji Young pointed them straight at the relentless Dominion and pushed the propulsion to maximum. Harlow's voice on the channel. "Ji Young. Admiral. You're not going to dodge." "No, sir." A pause. "That is either brilliant or—" "I'll let you know in about 3 minutes," she said. The Perseverance took the first hit on the bow section. Warning lights. Structural warnings. She flew through them. The second hit caught the top of the ship and the bridge briefly lost partial gravity, and she flew in half-weight for 10 seconds and it did not change her heading. The third shot missed, because the Threx targeting system, recalibrating for a target that would not move laterally, was aimed at the center of a ship that was instead flying in a very slight, very deliberate sine wave pattern, not evasion. Too small for that, but enough. Tarek had calculated to put the exact aim point 3 meters to the right of where the targeting algorithm expected it. 3 meters. The shot missed. She was close now. 800 kilometers. 700. The relentless Dominion filled her forward sensors. She thought about the wheat fields in Gyeonggi province where she had grown up, which had nothing to do with anything, and sometimes your mind just goes somewhere when you need it to be very still. "Fire," she said. Tarek fired all 4 weapons simultaneously. 4 focused energy beams hit the relentless Dominion at its 4 primary power junctions, positions identified from the wreckage of the 11 downed ships, analyzed and mapped and shared through the network, and loaded into the targeting system by bow the night before launch. The relentless Dominion went dark. Complete power failure. Not an explosion, not a debris field, just a ship, suddenly dead in space, drifting. Silence on the channel. Then 15 voices, in 7 languages, all at once. Vorkai sat in the dark of his powerless bridge. Emergency lighting came on after a few seconds, chemical, not electrical. The old failsafe, dim red-orange. His crew was at their stations, silent, looking at the dead screens. The comm system came back on partial backup power. He heard the human channel through the ship's passive receiver. He did not understand what they were saying, too many voices, too many languages at once. But he understood the tone. He sat with it for a moment. In the red-orange dark, above a planet he had come to take and had instead spent a year watching take him apart. He thought about the 31 worlds. He thought about the note. He thought about what he would write to the High Council, and what the Council would say, and what came next. There would be a negotiation. The Threx did not surrender. Exactly, but they had protocols for the end of an unwinnable campaign that had not been used in 11,000 years. Those protocols were about to get their first real use. He activated the emergency transmitter. "Human fleet," he said, in English, because he had spent 6 years learning their language before this conquest, because he had been so thorough. "This is Commander Vorkai, of the Threx Expeditionary Fleet. I am requesting terms of negotiation." The channel was quiet for a moment, Then Harlow's voice. Clear. Steady. Vorkai, he said. Here are the terms. Your fleet withdraws from Earth orbit today. Your ground forces withdraw from all occupied territory within 14 days. You release all prisoners. You return all resources taken. A pause. And you go home and you tell them every species within your reach. Every world you've already taken. Every world you're thinking about taking. You tell them what happened here. Vorkai was quiet. And if the High Council does not agree to these terms, Harlow said, then we'll come and make our case in person. Another pause. We have 17 ships, Vorkai said, something in his voice that had not been there a year ago. Something that was very close to what his second-in-command had sounded like on the day the missing soldiers were reported. You have 15. Today, Harlow said. We have 15 today. Check back in 6 months. The Threx ground forces began withdrawing on day 3. Rosa watched them go from the roof of the office building on the south side of Chicago that had been her headquarters for 11 months. She watched the columns of 8-foot soldiers moving toward their landing zones, organized and disciplined even in retreat, which she could respect without being anything other than glad they were leaving. The city was waking up around her. Real waking, not the careful, watchful emergence of people who had been living under occupation, though that was also there. But underneath it, the bigger thing. Trains, running, lights coming back on in buildings as the grid was reconnected, block by block. People on the streets who were walking somewhere with a purpose that was not survival but just life. Caleb stood next to her with his notebook. He had filled 47 notebooks over the course of the year. He had started a 48th yesterday. What are you writing now? She asked. Everything, he said, while I still remember it. He looked up at the sky, where the Threx ships were visible in daylight, visible and moving, their positions changing as the orbital withdrawal began. Someone needs to write it down. She nodded slowly. What happens next? He asked. Rosa thought about it. She thought about what Harlow had said on the Fleet Channel. The human network had been listening, because the human network was always listening. Check back in 6 months. We build more ships, she said. We rebuild the planet. We get very, very good at being in space. She paused. And we don't forget. Forget what? She looked at him. The kid who had been terrified in a Southside basement 11 months ago. The kid who had cracked open an alien communication system with salvaged parts and raw stubbornness and filled 47 notebooks because the world needed someone to be paying attention. Any of it, she said. Elena was in New Delhi when the last Threx ship cleared orbit. She stood on the platform of the rail junction, Priya's junction, running 4 lines now, doing good work, and watched the sky until the last silver shape dwindled and was gone and the sky was just sky again. Blue. Just blue. Some clouds. She stood there for a long time. She thought about Peterson Space Force Base and the board full of red lights. She thought about the basement in Colorado Springs. She thought about Torres saying all right then in the voice of a man deciding to blow up the things the enemy was counting on him to love too much to blow up. She thought about Dr. Okonkwo, and Bao, and Ji-young, and the 17-year-old in Bihar, and Harlow, in his submarine, and Rosa, and Caleb, and Priya, and all the names she knew, and all the names she didn't, all the people who had just refused, who had taken the worst year any of them had ever lived through, and come out the other side not broken. Changed, absolutely. Marked, permanently. But not broken. She pulled out her radio. Old habit. She still carried it. She clicked it on. Anyone on this frequency, she said. The sky is clear. The channel filled up immediately. Voices overlapping, different languages, different cities, different continents. She didn't try to pick out words. She just held the radio up and let it play, and felt the weight of it. This planet, 8 billion people, 1 bad year. Still here. Still here. Priya was beside her. He had been watching the sky too. We're going to need more trains, he said. A lot of them. The lines are broken in 8 provinces. All right then. Elena said. He looked at her. You know, I've heard you say that about 50 times over the last year, and it always sounds like it means something different. It always means the same thing, she said. It means, yes, and here's what's next. He nodded. He looked at the tracks. He looked at the sky. Empty now. Just sky. Here's what's next, he said. And they got to work. 3 weeks later, the first transmission went out from Earth. into deep space. Not a weapon, not a military signal, a broadcast, on every detectable frequency, aimed at the broadest possible dispersal across the galaxy. It was not long. It had been written by a committee of 12 people from 9 countries over 4 days, and the fact that they had agreed on it at all was its own small miracle. It said, "We are humanity. We are from the 3rd planet of a yellow star. 1 year ago, an empire called the Threx came to our world with 47 warships, believing we were weak, believing we were divided, believing we would collapse. We did not collapse. We want you to know who we are. Not as a threat, not as a boast, just as information. For whoever you are, wherever you are, reading this, we are the species that was almost conquered and chose not to be. We are here. We are not going anywhere. And we are paying attention now." The broadcast went out at the speed of light in all directions, carrying the words outward into the dark between stars where other eyes and other ears and other minds were watching the quiet, routine movements of a small civilization they had dismissed as unremarkable. Out in that dark, in committee rooms and command vessels and research stations, on worlds that had their own names for themselves that humanity had not yet learned, something shifted. Reports were filed, assessments were updated, old assumptions were very carefully revisited. An empire that had been observing Earth for its own reasons and had been considering its own approach timeline quietly moved that timeline back, indefinitely, because the broadcast was clear. And clear meant there was nothing more to study. They knew what humanity was now. The whole galaxy knew, and the whole galaxy decided, in its various quiet ways, that whatever they had been planning to do next, it could wait. This particular yellow star's 3rd planet could wait. That corner of the galaxy could wait. Some things were worth avoiding. Humanity, it turned out, was one of them.